Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Digital Front Door. I'm Scott Benedict. Today, we want to explore something that I think we've been tracking is one of the most critical and I think one of the fastest evolving aspects of retail, and that is the power of data and analytics. In an omnichannel world, data really drives everything from pricing to promotions, to assortment decisions, even how quickly products move from the shelf to the shopper's cart. But many organizations really still kind of struggle to turn insight that comes out of data into action. To help us kind of impact or unpack this topic, I'm joined by Lee Kallman. Lee is the Chief Commercial Officer at RD Solutions, a company that was redefining how data becomes execution in the world of retail. The great thing about having Lee here is he brings more than 30 years of experience across analytics, marketing, retail operations, and he and his company have helped both retailers and consumer brands transform billions of data points into smarter decisions and better performance. Lee, it's so exciting to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. Well, so one of the things I wanted to kind of start off by asking you is that, you've been at the center of retail data and the revolution of how data is used for a long time. And I'm kind of curious from your perspective, how has the industry's use of data evolved maybe over the last decade or so? And what's really driving some of the acceleration that we're seeing and how data is being used both by brands and by retailers today?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. I mean, I think the fundamental thing over the last decade is just the ease of access to data.
Yeah.
Right. We're in the competitive intelligence space. 10 years ago, the internet didn't exist from a grocery perspective.
Indeed.
I often, say, I finally get to clarify that because usually I'll say e-commerce didn't exist in the domain we're playing it. Oh no, e-commerce existed, not in grocery, right?
Yeah.
And so all the data that we were collecting 10 years ago was by our field team going in store and collecting data.
Right.
So there was all sorts of every client had a different sampling methodology to get to the data that they wanted. And so, our biggest clients 10 years ago are getting, what they're getting today. Our smallest clients are getting many factors of that more because of the availability of data online.
Yeah.
So, instead of having to say, I'm gonna sample these stores, then I'm gonna explode those prices out to this geography, it's reasonable to get all the data.
Right.
And so, so on one hand, you've got this accessibility and access to virtually every data point you would ever want.
Yes.
Now, the flip side of that is what do you do with it?
Right.
But in the last 10 years, that's certainly been the biggest component. And I think we're kind of at this inflection point now of as folks are starting to be able to really use a lot more of that. Because for a lot of years, we were finding as clients were getting web data, but they were basically then parsing it down to fit within the box that they created when they were getting in-store data. And so we're kind of at a turning point there.
No, and it makes sense. And it seems like we had more data about what was happening online than we had about in-store. And certainly the interplay between the two was very siloed. And I think we've seen that kind of evolve in the last few years to where not only does it help you understand what has happened, but I get the impression it's going to, at some point, start to help you predict what's going to happen in the future. And I don't know if you guys touch on that, but is that something you see maybe coming down the road?
Yeah, I mean, it's all. I mean, predictive analytics is a slightly more sophisticated way of thinking about trend data.
Right.
Right. So the more historical data you have, you can identify trends, and that starts to sort of drive what might happen or what's likely to happen in the future. As AI and all these other technologies becomes more robust and more central to kind of a retailer operation, right, I think that will further accentuate what can be done there. That's kind of what I meant by that inflection point.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And one of the things I noticed, spending some time on your website, is that one of your marketing taglines is this concept of turning insight into action. And that really spoke to me because one of the things that concerns me as a former merchant is that the goal of more data is not to win a trivial pursuit. It's to turn data into some sort of action. I'm curious, where do you see maybe some of the biggest gaps between collecting data and actually executing upon what the numbers tell us, and how do leading retailers maybe operationalize analytics in store as well as online?
Yeah, so I'll talk to that both from kind of a retailer perspective and a brand. I think from a retailer perspective, part of making that data actionable is sort of that foundational data management, data governance you bring to it. It's not the sexy stuff. It's not what people love to talk about. But without that, you don't have any, and especially as private label only increases in the percentage of the assortment. Having UPCs to sort of drive your data connectivity isn't the most reliable. And then you think about the web, where there's not UPCs on a lot of sites. So you've got to have mechanisms to say, these are the items I'm going to compare. And we start bringing in club stores. Now you've got different pack sizes. So there's a lot of that nuance to it. So it's an area, we've got technology and tools, as well as methodologies and processes that are a lot of our clients use. Either we're managing that for them, or in some cases, we're sort of providing a framework that they're managing that internally. It's always in partnership, because there's a lot of subjectivity when it comes to, does this item go with that item? Yes. Yeah. When we talk about that with clients, we always this line to the effect of, whenever we've shown sort of similar items to clients, if we have 10 clients in the room, we'll get, 9 to 11 different answers as to what's the right answer. And that's kind of the point, is there's not one answer. So it certainly that area for them to figure that out.
And that kind of brings me to more specifically a retailer's point of view, having been one for most of my career. And we operate now in an environment of, there's rising costs, tighter margins, shoppers' behavior, consumer shopping behavior is becoming more omnichannel, is influenced by a lot of different things. How do you think retailers that you work with make the best use of data to drive smarter decisions? And I realize that's probably a big question, because it depends on the functional area you're talking
100%.
about, from buying to marketing to supply chain. Where we may be seeing data make the biggest impacts in different functional areas across the clients that you work with?
Yeah, so from a retailer perspective, a lot of the data that we're providing, it's going into pricing, it's going into the merchandising team. So you kind of price and assortment from a competitive perspective. And as you said, there's more noise in the marketplace today than probably, well, certainly than ever has been. And so what that means is, you go back just a few years, if I'm a retailer, I've got real clarity as to who I'm really competing with. In today's world, you might have that one main competitor, but when you look at the way consumers are shopping and just the way the baskets are being broken up, I might be shopping 4 different places. And it's not just if I shop, if I shop at a low price provider, I might be also shopping at a higher kind of perceived quality of Whole Foods. So retailers didn't think that way years ago. And so if you shopped at a Walmart, maybe you shopped at an Aldi, but you're not also shopping at a Publix or a Whole Foods. And so all those rules are kind of out the window right now, which, is good for us, because it means you need a lot of that data. But it also creates a lot of chaos. And so, it's I think the retailers that are doing a good job sort of breaking through that have some degree of clarity in terms of what their strategy is, who they're trying to be. Because if you try to respond to every signal in the marketplace, you're going to be all over the place.
So it feels like not just the data itself, but the context of that data is probably how smarter decisions are made, whether you're a retailer or a consumer brand, I would think, right?
Yeah.
Now, and it's interesting, because a lot of our listeners either represent consumer brands or they're broker partners. And for them, I think the real question, I come at this from the perspective of a former buyer, having brands sit in front of me and wanting them to be the most informed in terms of what they're trying to sell me and what insights are driving that. How do you think brands can leverage analytics to build a strong relationship with their merchants, with their retail partners, really letting data drive some of those conversations? Because it feels like in areas of collaboration, we're a long way from the peddler coming in to sell the buyer with, here's this product, how many would you like, to a very different kind of collaborative relationship. What are maybe some of the best practices you see?
We're seeing some of our brand partners having some really good breakthroughs when it comes to going into those meetings with a really broad understanding of the marketplace in general.
Yes.
So it's not just, here's my product, here's who I am, here's all the great things I'm going to do for you, but showing that you have a real understanding of the category as it relates to that retailer, where you might fit in, how you're different from what they already have.
Yes.
And so that's a component. I mean, we deal in first-party data, then all the third-party data that we collect. And so it's within that third-party data, we kind of look at that as marketplace intelligence that we can provide. What are the other items in the category, the broader category, even going into the department level sometimes. What's most comparable to what I have? Where are the price points on that? How they promote it? Even getting into ratings and reviews, so you kind of get a sense of what's popular, what's not. So it's the old, right? Instead of just going in and talking about myself, I'm going to go in and talk about kind of the whole environment.
And I'll tell you, that's one of the things I loved as a buyer, was a supplier coming in with data, facts, and insights that built upon what I already understood and really challenged me to make better decisions. So I love seeing that in my impression. And part of why I thought you had an interesting perspective is it feels like we're living a bit of a different world on that, where that data is not nice to have. It's a need to have. And so one of the things I was going to ask you about was, I know that you and your team recently published some data that showed that about 86% of U.S. shoppers have switched or at least tried some private label items. I think the pandemic may have driven some of that. Inflation has driven some of that.
I think the pandemic brought a lot of that, and it was because of price sensitivity, but also just items being out of stock. So I'm gonna get what I can get, and then those habits have come forward. And so I mean, pricing has always been a key driver, a key differentiator between the store brand and the private label. And not surprising, we did a follow-up study recently on that. 89% of consumers said they'd switch to a store brand if I could save 20%. Like, that's not surprising. But then 56% said they'd save they would switch if they save 5%.
Right.
So it doesn't need to be a big savings to make that switch.
Right.
What's relatively new over the last couple of years is where the quality comes in.
Right.
So 64% of consumers said that they perceive store brands to be as good, if not better, than the national brand.
Right.
And when you look at the what's going on in the marketplace, and Walmart's Better Goods brand is a great example of that, and Unify and their Wild Harvest. It's people are moving away from the store brands being the store name.
Yes.
And that's obviously very intentional, because I want to build a brand beyond the store, but you're only going to get that brand here. And there's retailers have had a lot of success with that. It's interesting. I gave a talk at a grocery conference a few weeks ago on store brands, and all the people wanted to talk to me afterwards were brands. It wasn't retailers. And it's a relatively recent thing that we've seen of sort of this, okay, I need to understand that. And so we're doing a lot of work to sort of understand just what are the items in my category? What are the price variances between my item, between the national brand and the store brand? So it all comes back to having visibility to what's going on in the marketplace.
It feels like that's made the marketplace perhaps even better, because now those private label brands were originally felt like were conceived of just as to hit a lower price point or improve the retailer's margin, or both.
Right.
And now it's a much more thoughtfully arrived at, data-driven decision as to where you insert a private brand. And in some cases, to your point, Walmart's Better Goods is a great example, where you have a private brand that's an upscale or an upmarket solution, not just a lower price or an entry level price point solution.
Yeah, and the other curveball kind of being thrown into that are all the emerging brands that exist, and so it creates this noise of, I think from a lot of perspective, consumers don't necessarily, is it a store brand? Is it a national brand? I don't know that most consumers really care at all. It's just a brand. I like the item.
Yeah.
But there's more of these challenger brands on the shelves than ever before.
Yeah.
And they're all, I think, taking advantage of, a lot of the big CPGs have gotten really big.
Yes.
And as a result of that, the bigger you are, the slower you move, and therefore you're not very nimble.
Right.
And that's created this white space for the retailers to kind of fill the void of what consumers are looking for. And that's obviously where a lot of these challenger brands are coming from as well.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the things I heard at a conference, someone giving advice to challenger brands, is that you don't go in and sit in front of a buyer thinking that you're going to knock out Tide in laundry detergent. You're not going to talk. It's, can you use data to show the buyer that you're providing incrementality, that you've got additional sales that you wouldn't have gotten if that challenger brand wasn't there on the shelf. Mm-hmm. My point here is that it's data is informing those decisions, both for the challenger brand making the argument to the buyer as to why I want to be carried, and for buyers to make good decisions off of, and the common theme there is the data and the insights that come from it that maybe nobody was looking at previously, right?
Yeah, no, that's spot on.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to talk about is the evolution of omnichannel, which is not a new concept. What's really been interesting to me is we've gone from very siloed data and information to a more integrated view of the consumer, and I say that with a little trepidation, because not every retailer has connected this customer A is this person online and this person in the store, and that you have a full holistic view of a shopper. And I'm curious how retailers and brands are kind of tackling the challenge of integrating data sets between online in store to where they can understand consumers' behavior. Someone searching online but goes and walks into a store and buys it, but that's the same customer interaction. It just feels like connecting data into a full holistic view of a customer is still somewhat early days in a lot of retailers, because the consumers are shopping differently, and retailers have just figured out how to put that data together into a holistic view. Is that?
I think very early days. I mean, the consumer's light years ahead of where everybody else is in this, because a consumer doesn't think in terms of, I'm going to buy, in store, online. They don't think omnichannel. They think I'm shopping.
Yes.
90% of consumers now are shopping across both channels.
Right.
What's interesting is those consumers tend to spend 1.5 times the amount that somebody that shops in a single.
Yeah.
So like consumers are doing it. It's like they've adopted it. They're off and running with it. I think on the retail side, it's a little bit slower. I mean, use the word siloed, and that's very much what we've historically seen. Yeah. I think some of our more innovative clients are starting to sort of look at things much more holistically. Yeah. I think what we see a lot of times is where omnichannel is mostly thought about within retail is at the C level of the organization, because you have to get that high, because a lot of organizations, you've got pricing, you got separate pricing teams, you've got separate merchandising teams, and they don't really come together. So that's
at least not yet.
And it's a challenge. And I think in a lot of cases, they're trying to figure out, how do you do that? And, ultimately it's, Instacart's an interesting component in this part of the discussion, because, a lot of retailers jumped at Instacart kind of early days of COVID because they needed an e-commerce solution. And, and what they then learned was, most have learned is I've lost control of my brand. And it's, both in terms of sort of the promotional promises, the brand promises, pricing strategies. You see all sorts of things on these third-party sites where they're doing deals directly with CPGs, and it might be the exact same deal across the same promotion that will be on at one point when Walmart was on Instacart. There was a buy one get one offer for on Walmart through Instacart.
Yes.
On a couple other retailers, none of which that was part of their promotional strategy. What you've seen in the last few years is Instacart adapting to that, and there's now you can sort of just use Instacart for the back end, so they're taking control of their brand. But it's still, I was with a retailer a couple of weeks ago that Instacart is their e-commerce strategy, and they're priced 20% higher on Instacart than in store.
Yikes.
And in their minds, well, that's Instacart.
Yeah.
But nobody thinks they're shopping at Instacart. Instacart's who's delivering it.
Yes.
But I'm shopping at this retailer.
Yes.
So
it's still your brand. To the consumer, right?
So there's a whole thing to be played out there that'll be really interesting. But I think retailers have a long way to. There's still some evolution to be done there to truly look at that, because you can do things online. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things going on from a promotion perspective that you can do online that you can't do in store. And so obviously all the, highly custom offers, you can execute that online in a different way. There's some really innovative, the Walmart's Walmart Cash program is a really interesting program. You can't really execute something like that in store. And so you're going to have some differences. It's not that everything's going to be the same. And I've long maintained that, there's different value propositions across different channels. Way back when, in the early days of Webvan, it was right. My daughter was born. And so we started using Webvan. I lived in Atlanta at the time. I wasn't worried about how much more I was paying. I was paying because I didn't have to take a little infant into the store.
It was the convenience.
So there's a value prop associated with that, and so there's some recognition of that across the board. One of the interesting things when you talk about this from a manufacturer CPG perspective, then you start to get into all the third party marketplaces.
Yes,
because most retailers aren't doing as good of a job as maybe they can be in moderating that. It's very much the Wild West. And so, it ultimately, it's not a good look for the brands when you have, an item could be priced 40, 50, 60% higher through one of these marketplaces, or sometimes it's the other direction, lower. But, you're violating MAP policies but all this will, as time goes on, I think eventually be dealt with. But these are a lot of the things we're talking to clients about and solving a lot of these problems for them.
One thing that occurs to me while you're talking, when this concept of omnichannel and of consumer shopping across channels really broke into my consciousness was when I was in the wholesale club industry, when I was with Sam's Club, and the great thing that we had there was the common denominator of identifying a member was the member number translated across online purchases and in club purchases. Today, beyond the club channel, it feels like either loyalty programs or pending card data is the two ways that you can connect a consumer's behavior online and offline, and then unlock that data. To drive insights and hopefully drive more connected promotional activity. Is that, from your perspective, given what you do, is that kind of how a lot of retailers, when they finally realize, we should do that, is that how they're connecting someone's online persona and in-store persona? Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of third-party applications that sort of manage that. Where we get involved is more, we start to look at analysis of T-log data to kind of look at item segmentation. So we're not so much getting into those kind of custom one-to-one offers or specific shopping behaviors of individuals. But it's all these things. And even those lanes there within a lot of retailers, even that stuff's siloed. You've got teams that are making that are digging deep into that, and they have this breadth of information, but that's not necessarily always being used across over into pricing or even into a so I think that's a common theme, and we're seeing I think lately we're seeing more and more cross organization sharing of this information. Because a lot of it's there, it just needs to be unlocked.
That's the thing, particularly when I think about what you and your team do, that's part of the guidance that I think you have, that kind of agnostic perspective, because you don't have a horse in the race. You want the retailer or the brand to be more successful.
Yeah.
And that's what your company does. But if they don't have the data connected somehow, it's hard to unlock all of that, particularly if it's siloed parts of the organization.
Well, that it kind of hits on the core of a lot of what we do, and what's really unique is the ability to sort of take the data and make it actionable. We talk a lot about sort of this idea that, information without action just leads to anxiety. But it's actually being able to connect the dots. And, one relatively new example of something we've rolled out recently is on the brand side of things, is a platform where we're taking in third-party signals, first-party signals, and using that to identify store issues. And then, oh, by the way, we've got a few thousand employees in the field. So this idea that we can identify an out-of-stock issue, a potential phantom inventory issue, whatever it might be, and within 72 hours have somebody in the store to solve that problem.
That's awesome.
So it's
exciting.
It cuts that down, because I think what we've seen otherwise is best case scenario, I'm getting first party data, but I'm getting it and I'm dropping it into Excel, and I'm doing some work, and I hone in on some issues, and I find the 100 stores that there's an issue going on. I now need to find somebody to go in these stores. Best case scenario, you're 3, 4, 5 weeks in. You've got other problems at that point.
You've moved on.
So we've really cut that down, but that taking the data and making it actionable is the big thing.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me to the next question, which is really this concept of what we affectionately call a data-driven culture, about connecting people and processes. And obviously technology is a pretty critical component, but a culture where analytics drives outcomes, to your point, is it feels like we're still emerging, still in the early days in some cases. And is there any kind of recurring themes of things that you see, or that you advise clients, hey, this is maybe some of the organizational or cultural shifts that you need to make to truly unlock the value of the data and the insights that are available to us, that, whether you're a retailer or brand, you're not really putting it into action. To your point.
Yeah, I think from a company culture perspective, it's this idea that context is key.
Yeah.
So it's the people that are generating reports have an understanding of what the use case is. What am I actually trying to get to?
Yeah.
With the solution I mentioned before, we can monitor and go in store and fix things. There's all sorts of providers out there that are doing the first half.
Right.
And, and they talk about how they use AI and all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, but they don't fix it. So, again, it's like, if you can't resolve a problem, you're just giving me a problem. You're narrowing it down, perhaps. So I think context is key. I mean, we work with, some of the teams that we work with that seem to be really excelling, and from a retailer perspective seem to be excelling. It's when the people that we're working with really do understand the use case of what they're trying to do, because there's so much nuance to it. It's easy to sling the data and generate reports, but if you don't really know what you're looking for, what's the point?
Exactly. And I think that leads me into the last question I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to ask you to look forward a little bit over the course of the next few years, and what do you think retail analytics becomes? Obviously, we can't have a podcast without somehow the phrase artificial intelligence somehow weaving in here. But between AI and real-time data and predictive modeling, can you foresee kind of moving forward how does retail analytics change over the course of the next few years? And maybe as part of that, what what kind of expertise, what kind of training, what kind of skills do people need to be successful in either if they're on that full time or if they're just leveraging data to do whatever their job is in a retail business.
It definitely feels that we're on this precipice of real shift of things. I mean, if you think about just from a pricing perspective, the limiters in today's world for most retailers are very real. And that is, while I might have access to infinite data, I'm using legacy systems.
Yes.
There's still access databases and green screens actively being used across the retail universe. And so you have that as a limiter. Yeah. And then the other limiter is, all right, you want to make price changes. Well, in most cases, you still need a human being to print out a piece of paper and go put that on the shelf.
Yeah.
So, and that's been what sort of lagged a lot of this. Now, I think, I've talked to a number of clients in the last few weeks, and everybody's sort of saying that the ROI on electronic shelf tags finally is starting to make sense.
Yeah.
I think, Walmart's announced that they're rolling that out.
Yes.
Now, it's easy to kind of then get caught up in the discussion of, real-time pricing, it's going to be like Amazon. But the reality of it is you can't, I'm not sure. I think there's a cultural component there. Yeah. The price of milk can't change from the time I put it in my basket to the time I get to the,
exactly.
It's not a virtual shopping cart there.
Right.
But could we be seeing more price changes overnight? I would think so, because those are the limiters. I mean, I think you talk to most retailers, why do you mostly change price every week? Because that's the process, and we've got enough resources to do that. So I think between that being a very real sort of limiter, coupled with all these other technologies that will only get better at taking all this data and helping make decisions. I mean, it's interesting. You've been in this game to know that, are merchants ready to sort of hand off the decision making to AI?
I can assure you it's hard.
It's hard. And I know there's some really strong solutions out there that have some really, really strong ROI statements, but there's still that hurdle that this is how they've always done things. And I'm sure that will start to kind of erode. But I think those are some of the key things to start why we'll start to see real change in some of these areas in the next few years and see a lot of accelerated evolution, if you will.
That's awesome. Well, it's been an outstanding conversation. I think you've kind of reminded us that data isn't just about visibility. It's also about velocity, the speed at which change needs to happen, perhaps faster than it has happened, and making good quality decisions based off of that data is something that really, it's where retail is headed, and it's where the winners in retail are not only those that can see what's happening right now, but can use data to inform kind of actions and what they're going to go do next in a lot of different areas of the business.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It just feels like at the end of the day, retail is becoming a data business powered by human decisions still, but collaboration. So thank you, Lee, for joining us. It's been wonderful to have you on and to kind of share these insights.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You bet. For our listeners, we hopefully you've found this episode valuable. We hope you'll subscribe to our podcast and that you'll join us the next time on the Digital Front Door. And I'm Scott Benedict. Thanks for watching.